You'll hear people say you have to learn from your mistakes as a teacher. And you do. And yet, when you ask fellow teachers for stories about mistakes they've made, the details kind of flatten into generalizations. So you'll get these cliches like, I relied too much on the textbook, or I needed to learn to see students as individuals. Even then, they're probably quick to add that since then they've learned to incorporate the unique perspective that each student brings to the table and understand that this generation of students are digital natives. So this type of storytelling is understandable because anytime you have a story about teaching, there are kids involved. So if you're asked to tell a story about your teaching mistakes, there are some good reasons to share something that was really just a learning experience and where no kids were actually harmed in the making of this story. Unfortunately, the worst moments as a teacher usually don't fit that storyline where they were really just a learning experience. As a result, teachers' worst moments can make them feel alone and ashamed because people will talk about bad days they've had as teachers, but very few people will talk about the days they were bad teachers. But I am going to. Today is pretty close to the anniversary of my worst day as a teacher, which happened near the end of October of my first year. At the time, I didn't know that this is right on schedule for a terrible day of teaching. But I now know that there is a famous study of the phases of a teacher's first year done by an educational researcher named Ellen Moir, and she calls October and November the disillusionment phase. This is a time when new teachers tend to be exhausted and are questioning themselves. It's too early to start counting down to the end of the year, but at the same time, it's too late to have a do-over of all the mistakes you made in your first couple of months of teaching. And new teachers are experiencing the fallout of all of their early rookie mistakes. And by October of my first year, I had made plenty of rookie mistakes. For one thing, I had fallen way behind on grading and didn't realize it until my first report card grades were almost due. There were also about 5 loud kids in my class who dominated all of my attention, and then there were other kids in the class who I knew needed my attention so badly and weren't getting enough of it. And my strategy for all of this was to just keep staying at school later and keep staying up later at night, which I now also know is not a good strategy. I was so tired that on some Friday afternoons, I would fall asleep on my couch as soon as I walked into my house and wake up Saturday morning with my shoes still on. And when I was with my students, I couldn't be the teacher they needed me to be because my own emotional rubber band was always stretched right up to its breaking point. And then came this day near the end of October. I was more exhausted than usual, and my students were even more hyper than usual, and they just would not be quiet. And I can't emphasize this enough. I really needed them to be quiet. But the only way I could get them to be quiet for even 5 minutes at a time was to add more math problems to their homework. And I know what you're thinking here, so let me reassure you. Yes, I did know that it is bad teaching practice to give students math problems as a punishment. In fact, I was told in my teacher training that giving students homework as punishment makes them hate learning. So I knew I was making my students hate learning. I also knew that the worst behaved students weren't even going to do this punishment homework, so I was really only punishing my best behaved students and making them hate learning. So did I feel bad? Yes, I did. In fact, I was in what I now call the guilt, shame, rage spiral, which is when you start out feeling bad about your teaching in the moment, but then your distorted teacher brain takes this and turns it into shame that you are not the teacher that your kids deserve and you are probably never going to be. And that quickly becomes anger directed at a bunch of 9 and 10-year-olds who will not be quiet. By the end of the day, this homework had grown into about 70 math problems. And I walked my class to the parent pickup area turned around in the hallway to go back to my classroom. And on the way there, I run into the teacher next door to me. And she is carrying a plastic pumpkin full of candy. And she says, "So, did you do anything fun with your students for Halloween?" And the answer is no, I did not do anything fun with my students for Halloween because until that moment, I had not realized that it was Halloween. And it just kind of slowly sank into my soul that on top of all of my other failures as a teacher, I had ruined Halloween for a class full of 9-year-olds. It was all I could do to get to my car, pull out of the teacher's parking lot before anyone saw me cry, and get onto the highway. And after one exit, I had to pull off and pull into a Burger King parking lot and sit there for 2 hours because I was crying so hard I couldn't see the road in front of me. I just could not get over the fact that these students who needed a good teacher ended up with a teacher like me instead. It was a really bad day. And if I could go back in time and talk to that first year teacher version of myself, here's what I would say. This is a bad day and it was not a shining moment for you as a teacher. But when you look back at this 10 years from now, you will see it as just one day in a much longer and overall successful teaching career, not as a sign that you're not cut out for this profession. This is what I couldn't have possibly known back then, and what you may need to hear if you're a new teacher. The disillusionment phase is no fun, but it can help to think of it as a rite of passage. Most of the teachers that you admire went through a version of the disillusionment phase, and the teachers that come after you will go through it too. And if nobody's sharing their real worst day stories, it's not because they don't have them, it's because true worst day stories are hard to share. In fact, it was this stretch of my own career and the shame and secrecy that surrounded it that eventually inspired me to create the Disillusionment Power Pack. The Power Pack is a free series of emails meant to help new teachers through the toughest part of their year. And it is the closest I can ever get to traveling back in time to reassure that first year teacher version of myself. Then again, maybe if I could time travel, I'd just go back to the day before this whole story happened and say, hey, don't forget, tomorrow is Halloween.